Welcome, welcome everybody to this second international conference of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Future, devoted to the follow-up of the conference on the future of Europe, at a time in which there are very significant developments with relation to the international situation and European integration and the European Union as such. We were supposed to start with a greeting from our rector, who unfortunately had a problem and sent me a text that I will now read you for his greetings. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, dear students, it is a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you today on behalf of eCampus University to the second international conference organized by our Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Future, devoted to the future of Europe. This event is particularly meaningful for our university because it highlights the importance of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Future, which we are proud to host. Thanks to the leadership of Professor Roberto Castaldi and the commitment of our academic community, the center has become a focal point for reflection and debate on the European Union, its integration process, and its prospects. Our Center of Excellence is closely connected with the broader activities of the Research Center on Multi-Level Governance and Integration Processes. This center has not only launched fEUture, but also developed the U-Value project and is now starting a Jean Monnet teacher training project. These activities represent a strong and coherent effort to advance knowledge, foster debate, and train new generations of scholars and professionals on the future of Europe. At a time when the European project faces unprecedented challenges not only in the global arena but also internally, due to the raising of Eurosceptical political forces, and since Europe's role is crucial for peace, democracy, sustainability, and innovation, universities have a responsibility to provide spaces for critical thinking and dialogue. We firmly believe that our Jean Monnet Center of Excellence can contribute to this mission, helping to imagine and shape the future of Europe together with researchers, policymakers, and civil society. The importance of these projects lies also in their focus on training the trainers, whether university professor or secondary schools teacher. Since there is no common European citizenship education at the EU level, the Jean Monnet project aims to fill this gap by equipping educators with the tools and knowledge necessary to teach Europe to the younger generations. This represents a concrete commitment to building a truly European society. I wish you all a fruitful discussion and inspiring exchanges, and I thank you once again for being part of this important journey for our university. Thank you very much. Enzo Siviero, Rector of the University Campus. So we thank the Rector for his very kind words. And for this first session, we have two speakers, Sara Bertolli and Professor Daria Perrone. Sara Bertolli represents here civil society. She's a researcher at the International Center for European and Global Governance and the president of the Young European Federalist in Italy. So she's been involved in all the discussion about the future of Europe for a long time. While Professor Daria Perrone, she teaches here at eCampus University. She's a member of the core staff of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, and it's a great pleasure to have Daria intervening in this conference, which is also the fruit of her work together with the other academics that are part of the center. So without any further hesitation, I will give the floor to Dr. Sara Bertolli, President of the Gioventù Federalista Europea and researcher at the International Center for European and Global Governance. She will speak about young people and the need of a European active citizenship education. Sara Bertolli, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roberto Castaldi, and thank you all for inviting me in this meeting. I think that these initiatives are important, especially what you are doing at University eCampus with the Center fEUture. So I would like to start about speaking a bit of what does it mean to be young people in the European Union, but not only in the European Union in general today. What young people are facing, and I think this is quite obvious, is a sense of uncertainty, which is due both to to a difficulty in imaging a future, since I will speak more in deeply after about the situation of the post-ideological desert, which we are facing now. But of course, the fear of future is also due to the fact that we are facing for the first time I think the biggest crisis ever, which is the environmental crisis, that for the first time gives doubts also about the survival of the whole humankind. So it's, of course, we have had in the past the nuclear crisis, which is still on the table. Of course, it's not yet overcome, but the environmental crisis seems something that it's so big, not that no one cannot really tackle, because of course we don't have the governance empowered enough to tackle it, which would be of course a world governance. I will start with a concept developed by the French philosopher Edgar Morin, and then by the historian Tose, which is the concept of the polycrisis. So the idea, according to Tose, is that we are in a time where the major global crises interact with each other in a way that the sum of the parts of this crisis is more overwhelming than the mere sum. So it means that each crisis in some way interact one to the other, and they are interconnected. And this becomes a factor that amplify all of the crises. If we think, for example, about wars nowadays, of course, they are also due to the lack of resources, of natural resources, which are also connected to the climate crisis that I was mentioning before. And then we see, of course, the deeper interconnection at the global level due to globalization, which is also something that, of course, involves other things that we now perceive as crisis, because, as I was saying before, we don't have the means to tackle them. For example, migration or economic crisis that are now interconnected. The consequence of this polycrisis is something that, to paraphrase Anthony Giddens, the British sociologist, we can call ontological insecurity. He developed the concept of ontological security, but now I would like to invert it. So with ontological insecurity, we can define a sense of disorder, insecurity, discontinuity in a rapidly changing environment, which of course affects also the perception of the individuals, how we perceive ourselves in this new world. And this causes also a crisis of the people, and it's connected with the fact of not seeing a future clearly. So people just, and especially the young people, have this sense of uncertainty, and they just think about themselves not in a line, not seeing the future in a line, but mostly in a circle where really there is no projection of themselves in the future. This is, of course, due to something that I also mentioned before, the post-ideological desert, the fact that the great 20th century narratives like Marxism, liberalism, social Christianity, in some ways also nationalism, with all of its limits, of course, they have crumbled, leaving a field the field to an horizon where individual freedom increasingly coincides with individualism. So all of these narratives have left to an ideological desert where we concretely see that there are no clear ideologies that can that can give the people a projection of themselves in the future, which is something that all of these ideologies had in common, a clear vision of the future they wanted, and of course around that they built a narrative also for the people. So now we are facing an era of individualism, which is also connected, of course, to the crisis of the truth. So each truth is true. Everyone can give their own perspective, their own truth, and it can always be doubt. The other thing that is that we can add in this critical scenario is the fact that we are living in what Gramsci would have called the interregnum. So the fact that we are facing crisis, it consists, quoting Gramsci itself, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old dies and the new cannot be born. And in this interregnum, the most varied, morbid phenomena occurred. We can see this interregnum adopting the federalist lenses as the fact that we are living in a system, an old one, based on nation states, even in the European Union, but maybe I can develop it later. So we live in a system of nation state, but at the same time, the crisis that we are facing, the challenges that the humankind is facing, cannot be tackled at a national level, sometimes at the continental level, but most of the time at the world level. But the fact is that the new order, so the global order, is not yet born, or the one that is already born is not empowered enough to manage all of this crisis. And of course, in this situation, it's where the nationalists and sovereign forces can find a field to develop, giving a narrative which is a simplistic narrative of the world, and giving what Zygmunt Bauman defined a retrotopia. So they are giving this perspective of a past that never existed, but it is way more certain in some kind than the future that is not there yet. So it's a strategy, of course, the one used by the nationalist forces that gives the people the certainty of a past that never existed. But for the people, it's easier to think in the past and to think that that past was better. And now I'm talking about, of course, the super power of the national state that never existed and brought us just to wars in the European continent, first the First World War and the Second World War, but also all the wars that happened before in the European continent. But it's easier and more welcoming horizon to image than a future where we don't know where we are going. So this is, of course, are all elements that affects the young people. And I think that it's important when we talk about also building the European society, the European people, to keep in mind all these elements, especially because the future European generations are affected now by all of these elements of uncertainty. And as I was saying, in using this narrative of the crisis and about the retrotopia, these are all elements on which nationalism is built, and by which nationalism also reproduce a narrative. And the narratives that nationalism use is, of course, the one about the motherland, so the territoriality aspect, the nation perceived as as not only the unity of the people, but of course people that insist over a specific territory, which is the base category of the nation state. But now in a globalized world, we can ask ourselves which are the borders of the countries, and if those borders that were based on a nation idea are still valid. We see movements that advocates for the overcoming of these borders, and communities that want to empower themselves and maybe go back in a vision of themselves which is closer to what we can connect somehow to the Greek polis, no? So smaller communities based on a view of themselves. So the limits that we are now facing, of course, due to the nation state and the nationalist narratives, is about, as I was saying, the borders and the motherland in a globalized world, the unity of the people, which is based on exclusion. But our society are now so interconnected that it's even difficult to define who are the people of a state, who are the Italians, who are the Europeans, who are the Americans, and so on. And the other thing on which these narratives build themselves is the external projection of the nation, conceived as a clash with other nation. Now we are facing in Europe in the European Union. I want to say Europe because Europe, of course, we already have the war in Ukraine, but we are facing in the European Union in these days the direct attacks of the Russians, and at the same time we are seeing Trump acting in the UN as an emperor, as if he was the king of the world. So now we are also seeing again a clash of imperial powers like Russia and like the US. China, it has its own way of projecting itself in the global arena. But I would definitely say that now we are again in a clash, not of civilization, I would say, but a clash of emperors. And the other thing, of course, is the ideology that still is built at the national level on the idea of nations, even though nations are not anymore capable of providing a view of the future and a view of better future to the people because of all the limits that I was saying before, which is of course the fact that the crisis that we are facing cannot be tackled at the national level. And as federalists, we always criticize this narrative, because of course we know that crises such as the disruption, say, of the global order, or the migration, or which I won't say that it's a crisis. The crisis is the fact that it's not managed enough, and of course the digital transition, and we can also add the globalization, the production, and so on. These are all elements that cannot even be tackled by a European federation, but they need a world government. But the only organization that we could think about are the United Nations. But of course the United Nations, they have all of their limits, which are still national limits, like they are limits that have been settled by the nation, as it is in the European Union, and therefore we cannot, the UN cannot answer and give a concrete answer to the fears of the people. And the nation idea and the nationalist idea, it is reproduced, as Bourdieu would say, by the institution. So the cultural hegemony, that Gramsci would have added in this Bourdieu narrative. Is reproduced by the institution, an institution that Bourdieu found as the means of reproduction, family, religion, and the states, which includes also the school system. And I wanted now I will switch to the other part of the of this speech, which is why a European civil education is needed and to do what. Of course, for all I was saying before, since the greatest narratives of the civilizations are produced and reproduced by family, religion, states, which means laws, but also all the institutions that are within the states, also the school system. We need to end also the school systems to develop another narrative, which is the narrative of the European people. So the fact of acting also in this field of the school system is, of course, connected to the building of the European people, of a European common sense, of a European common destiny, to give an alternative to the uncertainty that the young generations are feeling now. Today we don't have European common civic education because the education is still a supporting competence of the EU. It means that it is a competence in the hands of the EU member states, and somehow the European Union collaborates with types of projects. Of course, we all know the Erasmus project, but there are also other types of projects that can be mentioned. One is the Jean Monnet, which is still in the Erasmus Plus project, but the idea of the Jean Monnet is especially the one of promoting teaching and research excellence in European studies. The networks of the Jean Monnet are most of the time led by a university, and they include high school students and teachers. And the idea is to teach the trainers, so to teach the universities professor, the academia, at the same time to teach also the high school teachers to what is the European Union, what is the European integration process, and also which are the added values that the European project can give in I was think shaping a different future. And then we have the Marie Curie projects as part of the Horizon project, which is a hugest framework program for research and innovation that is especially for university and private sector. And then there are other different programs that the European Union has developed so far. For example, the Discovery EU, which was an idea to give the young people the possibility to travel all around Europe freely when they turned 18. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to do that because I was too old at that time. But these are all elements of creating, as I was saying, the European people. As federalists, we believe that thanks, to the general theory elaborated by Mario Albertini, that federalism is based on three aspects. One is the value aspect, which is the peace. The second aspect is the institutional one, so the institutional asset that gives a framework for guaranteeing the value, which is peace. And the third element is the social historical dimension that includes also the society. And in this way, all of these actions, the one we are doing now, also all the other projects about teaching the European Union, they are all elements in this that goes in this sense to create also a support, a consensus among the people, or I would say better, self-awareness of being European citizens that can try to shape a different European Union that I hope very soon can overcome the intergovernmental approach on which it is based right now to really be a more democratized European Union, more united Europe, more I was already mentioned, more democratic one, thanks to the fact that the institutions are adapting themselves to the society that is changing. So if we are creating a European society, European people, then also the institutions need to reflect the society that is changing. And in this sense, to overcome all the limits that the actual European Union has, as I was saying, the intergovernmental approach, which is reflected in the veto power and the overpower of the bodies that represents the nation states in the European Union, the Council of the EU and the European Council. Respect to the European Parliament, which is the only directly elected institution by the citizens, but in all the bodies, Commission, Parliament, Commission, Consilium, Council, and European Council, the Parliament is the one that is lacking most of the power, since it's the only democratic parliament in the world that does not have legislative initiative. So to conclude, I think that like my idea was to give to you an overview about what the young European people are facing in terms of self-crisis, in terms of future vision, and in terms of self-projection in the world, but at the same time also giving a perspective on which are the elements that can really help the young people also in find new ways to think about themselves and to shape their own future, which, in my opinion, it's only the only future possible is in a more united Europe, in a more united and democratic world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara, for your very interesting speech. So I will, before opening the debate, I will first give the floor to Professor Daria Perrone, Senior Researcher of Penal Law here at eCampus University. She will speak about European policies on combating environmental crime, observation on the EU Directive 1203 of 2024. Daria, please, you have the floor.
First of all, I thank the organizers. It was with great pleasure that I accepted Professor Castaldi's invitation to speak today on the topic of environmental crime law. I would like also to thank Professor Bertolli for her inspiring suggestions. The issue of criminal protection of the environment is certainly not easy to address. And this is an issue that has long been a source of ideological conflict and compromise regarding criminal policy choices between those, for instance, who support entrepreneurial development and those on the other side who advocate for a long-term environmental.
Excuse me, Daria. Can you speak up a little bit louder, please, so that we can hear you a little bit better? Thank you.
You don't hear me before, or?
No, we could hear you, but
Okay.
not very well. So if you can speak louder or
Sure.
closer to the mic,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
would
yeah.
certainly help. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I was saying that the issue of criminal protection of the environment is certainly not easy to address. This is an issue that has long been a source of ideological conflict and compromise. In the Italian legal system, starting from the well-known events that have marked legal as well as political and industrial history. I mean, for instance, I think to Eternit case or Porto Marghera case or Ilva case. A debate has developed primarily doctrinal regarding the adequacy of the punitive response in the environmental sector. The most critical aspects have concerned the widespread perception that the regulatory framework is generally unsuitable to address the increasingly pressing needs for protecting a legal asset like the environment, which has long lacked adequate protection. Only recently, for example, in Italy, with the constitutional law number 1 of 2022, has the environment received express constitutional recognition in Articles 9 and 41 of the Constitution. Well, the aim of my speech today will be to highlight the strengths and the weaknesses of the current European model of criminal protection of the environment. We will also attempt to formulate some proposals for the future implementation of criminal protection. As part of the package of initiatives adopted to implement the European Green Deal on February 2024, the European Parliament approved in first reading the proposal with 499 votes in favor, 100 against and 23 abstentions. The new directive marks the transition in terms of European policy in the fight against environmental crime, from an original minimalist approach emblematically represented by the 2008 directive to a new approach expressly defined from European Commission holistic. In the European institutions' intentions, the new approach will give the hope for improved climate change and the environmental conditions by ensuring more intense protection against environmental crimes. So I will focus on the legal context before the reform through an analysis of gaps and faults of previous 2008 directive and of the causes of missed aims of a harmonized legal framework for environmental crimes. Then I will shift my speech to the text of the new directive, analyzing its purposes and guidelines. As we will see, the introduction of a very detailed framework should resolve previous mistakes and fill the gaps left by the 2008 directive. Some potential criticism of the new directive will not be overlooked. Thoughts turn in particular to sometimes excessive anticipation of criminal protection and to the potential conflict with the principles of legality and ultima ratio. Until the latest reform, the 2008 directive was the main European instrument for environmental protection through criminal law. the protection model used in this instrument was a compromise. The authors of the directive were hesitant to infringe on the legislative discretion of member states. Therefore, they decided to adopt a minimal regulatory structure consisting in only 10 articles. Criminal law was only to be applied in case of severe pollution, the protection from which was deemed necessary. In compliance with the criteria of the minimum standard, the directive opted for minimum rules. Member states were free to adopt or maintain more stringent measures regarding the effective criminal law protection of the environment. The only condition being the compatibility of the respective measures with the provisions of the treaty establishing of the European Community. Consequently, following the principle of ultima ratio, the 2008 directive prioritizes offenses that cause significant harm to the environment. I mean, see for instance the use of expressions such as substantial damage or significant deterioration. To limit the area of permissible risk, punishment was limited only to conduct committed intentionally or with at least serious negligence carried out unlawfully. Unfortunately, 15 years after the adoption of this act, the European Commission has highlighted in its document evaluation the crisis of this legal approach and the failure to achieve the originally set objective of sufficient harmonization and standardization of the legal framework in the European area. In fact, despite the increasingly incisive controls by the European Commission, the transposition of the 2008 directive within the Union occurred in a very uneven and fragmentary way. The missed aim of a harmonized legal framework for environmental crimes depended on various factors. Firstly, it's important to bear in mind that the 2008 directive was created under a different regulatory framework than the current one, as it was adopted before the Lisbon Treaty. In consideration of this, it's understandable that the minimalist approach adopted in the directive is today, I mean many years later, and under a very different regulatory framework, too sparse and inadequate compared to the new challenges posed by the advancement of the climate change. However, the main issue with the 2008 directive was the failure to define crucial concepts that are functional in delimiting the criminally relevant area. Many of the terms used in the 2008 directive are not thoroughly defined, bringing a risk of diverging interpretations and practice in the field. The choice to resort to deliberately ambiguous provisions aimed to allowing member states to have wide discretion on how to accommodate the requirements arising from the directive standards and to adapt them to specific national needs has proven inadequate in the medium-long term to dictate a homogeneous European discipline. Think about the provision of substantial damage to the quality of air, soil, water, or to animals or to plants, or about the provision of significant deterioration within a protected site. The absence of qualitative or quantitative parameters apt to qualify the intensity to the environmental damage has allowed the member states to adopt highly diversified definitions regarding the contents of the typical offense. In this context, the new directive was adopted with the awareness that the European approach represented by the 2008 directive was inadequate to the challenges posed by the worsening of the climate change. fighting environmental crime has gained importance and has become one of the European priorities. Scholars have largely become aware of the danger of environmental crime. So among them, there is a growing number of those who are engaged in the analysis of the action of social control tools to suppress crimes against the environment, things so-called green criminology. Among the various challenges, certain refractoriness named NIMBY syndrome. I mean, NIMBY, it means not in my backyard syndrome. Some states, including European ones, show a certain refractoriness to the implementation of sustainability limits for fear of putting an excessive brake on the industrialization process. So in this, the process of enforcement of the minimum common rules on the subject of environmental crime, the challenge faced by European institutions today seems to be primarily cultural. It involves fighting against national policies that are not sensitive to issues related to the green economy and the protection of common goods. From the beginning, the directive proposed a new model of environmental protection oriented towards a holistic approach of high symbolic and expressive value. It marks the transition from a minimalist approach focused on the provision of a few rules and value definitions. We think about the 2008 directive, to a holistic approach characterized by a detailed regulatory provision and with many constraints for national legislators. Indeed, the directive aims to remedy the errors of the past, especially those errors that caused the non-uniform transposition of the previous directive among the member states. The intent is clear: to harmonize the regulation of individual legislation and avoid excessive discrepancies in the fight against environmental crime in Europe. The new directive aims to reduce the discretionary spaces left to the member states. To achieve this goal, more stringent rules have been introduced in the typification of the offenses, both through the introduction of more detailed provisions and through the definition of some concepts which, in the past, have given rise to interpretative doubts, such as habitat, or ecosystem, or unlawful, the term unlawful. Another significant aspect is the strengthening of the precautionary principle. The directive seems to distance itself from the approach adopted by the 2008 directive, declaring in the recitals that it considers the integration between the precautionary and the prevention principle essential as a strategic objective. The main idea is to face the worsening of the climate change by giving more space to the precautionary principle, sometimes considered more functional in protecting the environment. The intention to anticipate protection in a precautionary way, possibly also moving away from the scheme of crimes structured with a link to the administrative law, has been expressly declared during the press conference on February 2024 by Antonius Manders, rapporteur on the directive. Quoting Michael Ford, he declared that with the new directive, operators must be aware that merely complying with a permit no longer frees them from criminal liability. The new directive is also characterized by a dynamic nature. The list of crimes contained was not conceived as something static, but as a continuously evolving list, which can be constantly updated based on the emerging needs of fighting environmental crime. In this respect, the Commission should regularly consider if there is a need to amend the description in this directive of conduct capable of constituting a criminal offense. Regarding the catalogue of environmental crimes, Article 3 of the new directive, in addition to modifying those already provided in the 2008 directive, included many new offenses, such as the placing on the market and use of dangerous substances, the manufacture, use, storage, import or export of mercury, also the execution of unlawful projects, the recycling of ships, the ship source discharge of polluting substances, the abstraction of surface water or groundwater, and the bringing into the territory of the Union and the placing on the market of invasive alien species, and yet the production or release of fluorinated greenhouse gases, and so on. The issue of whether ecocide crime should be included among the new crimes was a subject of intense debate, initially mentioned only incidentally in the recitals. In the proposal approved by the European Commission in 2021, this offence was then included in a proposed amendment by the Committee on the Legal Affairs of the European Parliament in March 2023, only to be mentioned again in the recitals at section 21 in the final text. Using this term in the recitals means the directive does not give the term ecocide a legally binding force, but only an interpretative and clarifying rule. As for the technique of describing the criminal type, most crimes require the integration of harm, actual or potential, but the catalogue of crimes of abstract endangerment has expanded, such as the recycling of ships or the production or release of fluorinated greenhouse gases. The advantages of crimes of abstract endangerment consist not only in avoiding that the criminal sanction intervenes too late once the damage has already occurred, but also in circumventing the problem of causality, which in environmental matters concern both macroscopic and immediate harmful events, and above all, long latent ones. Moreover, the fact that the directive moves in the direction of an accentuated anticipation of protection is also evident from the choice to provide for some particularly serious crimes even the punishability of the attempt. Thus, there is an obligation to incriminate the attempt to place on the market a product, the use of which on a larger scale likely to cause the death or a serious injury to any person or substantial damage to the quality of air, soil, water, or substantial damage to ecosystems, animals, or plants. The aim pursued by European institutions expressly stated with the reform is to increase environmental protection and harmonize legislation between member states. In Europe, legislative harmonization is relevant not only to reducing legal differences between member states, but also to achieving certain political objectives, as well as a general European common good. These goals are extremely important to increase the capacity to fight cross-border crime, and other forms of transnational organized crime. And also, we can think to combat the existence of so-called safe havens. And now I'm moving to my conclusions. The directive marks a turning point. Criminal protection must no longer focus on environmental disasters, with the logic that if there is a damage, it must be punished according to the logic that polluters must pay or at least repair the damage. This old model of protection, of course, exalted the judge as a direct protagonist in the fight against pollution, with a view to criminal law addressing emergencies and protection gaps. The risk, however, is that once a disastrous event has occurred, the judge becomes the architect of a situational justice, susceptible to social consensus ex post. The goal of environmental protection, then, is likely to be better pursued by looking not at the severity of the event from an ex post perspective, but rather at the severity of the conduct from an ex ante perspective. In search of alternatives to the event-based criminal law model, environmental criminal law is now focused on predicting conduct-based crimes without the need to wait for disastrous events to occur. Attaching the law after the damage has already occurred can no longer satisfy the need to protect one of the most important legal assets for our survival in the home that belongs to us. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Daria, for a very interesting presentation. So we can now open the floor if there are questions from the people connected or here in the room. And in the meantime, while you're thinking about your question, I'd like to pose two of them, one to Sara and one to Daria. So we'll start with Sara, because I know that as you are president of Young European Federalists, I remember that in 2024 for the European election, the Young European Federalists, European level, gathered the opinion of a few millions young people about the future of Europe. So I'd like to understand, as you were referring to the situation of young people today, what were the priorities regarding the future of Europe of these young citizens that you gather, and on the other hand, also if they also ask specifically about the need of a European citizenship education, like the conference on the future of Europe did, because this is one of the many suggestions and proposals that came out of the conference, which so far have had a very limited follow-up on the part of the European institutions. And I wonder if this is something which is perceived as well by young people. Well, for Daria, I would like to ask you what, in your view, is the added value that the European Union intervention has on this issue, because traditionally penal law has not been a significant field of competence for the EU. At the same time, the EU has managed to regulate on the environment very significantly. And so the fact that environmental crime are probably among the first areas in which we are developing a criminal law at European level seems to me very significant from that point of view. And I wonder, you mentioned a number of critical aspects of the first directive, that the new directive is trying to fill the gap and to in order to reach the original goal of this issue. But what is the debate also among experts regarding this new attempt by the European Union to intervene in a field like criminal law, which so far has been basically entirely reserved to the national level alone? Because on the one hand, even when we think in terms of comparative federalism, for example, even in the United States, criminal law is a a concurrent competence. So there are, for instance, certain states that have a death penalty and some others do not. There are some offenses that are federal offenses, while many other are at state level. In the European Union, we don't have this kind of distinction for penal law, but it's also true that these are the first attempt to build some form of criminal law at the European level. And I wonder if there was a reflection in terms of comparative criminal law with regards to other federal system. In general, and specifically regarding this issue of environmental criminal law, which I think is something that is starting anew also in other countries, because anyway, this is a new sector, and probably this is also the reason why it was easier for the EU to start regulating criminal law in this specific field, because it was new. There was not a strong corpus of law at the national level, because these are new are new crimes in a way. And so I wonder if this has spurred a debate also among scholars and experts regarding this potential new competence of the EU, and what can be the added value for the citizen of having some level of harmonization on criminal law, and especially, of course, on criminal environmental law. So there are other people who want to ask questions. We can eventually gather them. Yes. Okay, we have here Amanda Ribucchini who would like to pose a question. So please join us here, Amanda, so that they can hear you.
Okay. Nice to meet you all. I'm Amanda from Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies. And I wanted to ask two questions to Daria, actually. The first one is like, if you can dig more specifically on the crime of ecocide, because I had the chance to study it this year, and I think it's a really interesting topic in which the debate is really open among scholars, but I don't know so much about it. So I will love to know more. And the second question is about all the cases in Europe concerning climate litigations, like Urgenda, for example, or the one in Italy. And I don't know if they can help, like, how can we deal with them in order to spread the debate also among citizens about criminal climate law and climate litigations and so on. And I have a question for Sarah too. And the question for Sarah is about, like, you spoke about young people and uncertainty in the interregnum, and it was so interesting. My question here is, how can we build consensus and opinions on the European Union about young people? So it's like following Roberto's question about Europe, and how can we like continue this work even after the European elections?
Well, thank you, Amanda, for your very interesting questions. So if there are others from the people connected online, otherwise maybe we can have a first round of answers. So Sarah, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto, and thanks to Amanda for the very interesting question. So, as Roberto was mentioning during the conference on the future of Europe, which was the largest democratic participation ever launched by the European Union, which should have been started in 2020, but then due to COVID, it started in 2021 and lasted until May 2022. It was an idea that was promoted by the presidents of the three European institutions, Commission, Parliament, and Council. And European Council, sorry. And the idea was to ask the citizens about which Europe they wanted for their future. It was declined in different ways. There was a platform at the European level, which was which looked like Twitter, let's say, where people could post their ideas and support others people's ideas, and it was divided into hubs. There were citizens' assemblies, so European citizens have been randomly phoned called by the European Commission at the phone and were asked to be part of these assemblies. One of them took part also in Florence, next to the place where I live at the European University Institute. Here, still the connection between universities and the European dimension, which is important also in the words of the rector of eCampus University, that I really appreciated. And yes, within this framework, many NGOs and the European CSO organize themselves to amplify the echoes of the conference on the future of Europe, and at the same time also to advocate for their own instances. And as young European federalists, especially the European section, which is based in Brussels, we created this online platform, which was just for young people under 35. And we wanted to collect the needs and the ideas of Europe among the young generation. And what came out of this report, that it was therefore presented also to some members that were leading the conference on the future of Europe, and also it has been recently presented to a member of the European Commission, the results. What came out of this consultation was that young people wanted a federal Europe. And this wasn't only regarding our consultation, but also in the consultation done by the European institutions. Because I remember at the European Youth event in Strasbourg that some results were presented, and the first thing that citizens wanted was a federal Europe. Then other subjects were, of course, the digital and ecological transition, justice, digital and ecological transition at European level, migration policies, and also more budget for the European Union. And as you can see, these are all elements that, if enforced, they will directly bring to another institutional asset for the European Union, which is a federal asset, of course, because if to enlarge the budget, of course, it's needed treaty reform, or new own resources, which of course needs a treaty reform to overcome, and then there will be the necessity to overcome the veto power of the European Council, because there are countries that do not want a bigger budget, or the need, for example, of common debt at the European level, and still here we need to overcome the veto power, as well as, for example, for migration policy, because it's still something that it's in the field of foreign policy, and in that field still the same voting system in the Council. So these are what the citizens asked, even though maybe they weren't really aware of the impact of their request, is actually a treaty reform. A reform of the European treaties. And this is also an outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe, because indeed the Conference on the Future of Europe produced some reports. These reports were took into consideration by the AFCO committee, which is the Commission on Constitutional Affairs of the European Parliament. There it was elaborated a project of treaty reform, voted, and then it was voted by the European Parliament in 2024, if I'm not wrong, 2023.
November 2023.
November 2023. I was mistaken because of in April, if I'm not wrong, 2024, the council should have added it to the agenda, but it never happened. So in the end, we have a project produced, a request actually produced by the citizens, even indirectly, but it was the idea of the citizens that the parliament adopted and of course reshaped due to the internal politics. And then we have the limits, as I was saying before, of the nation state and national sovereignty that now is not even discussing what the citizens asked. So this is one side. Of course, another thing that was developed in this process was also the request for a European civic education, like a framework, a unit, let's say, common at the European level. And this is the reason why we have now some types of Jean Monnet project that really aims the idea of creating these European units. So this is, of course, another important outcome of the Conference of the Future of Europe, for what I was saying before about building the European people. And to answer Amanda Ribichini's question about how can we build a consensus among the young people, I would here bring an example of as a youth NGO, as Jeff Italy, Gioventù Federalista Europea, we have declined the Conference on the Future of Europe itself. So within this huge campaign that I was saying was brought by our European branch, the Jeff Europe, which was called Europe. And I think it was a very nice slogan, because it gave the idea to give hope again to Europe and the citizens and the Europeans. We declined it in our way in Italy. And we created the biggest network of youth non-partisan NGOs in Italy, which is called Europa Porto Europa. It's composed by 15 non-partisan youth organizations that represents more than 200,000 young people that are involved. Also the Fridays for Future, Catholic Association as Azione Cattolica, Giovani delle Acli, and then university associations, for example, Erasmus Student Network, Italy, but also other youth med and so on. So it's a wide network, and the idea was to relaunch the European project. From a place where the European Union was failing, which was Lampedusa, because we created a declaration for the birth of this network on the 3rd of October 2023. It was the 10th year anniversary of the shipwreck happened in Lampedusa, which is the biggest ever happened in the Mediterranean Sea, which is still, according to the International Organization of Migration, Mediterranean is the biggest, the most deathful border in the world. So we decided to launch this project to relaunch the European integration process from an island to an island, symbolically from Ventotene Manifesto. We had our own manifesto. We presented it in the European Parliament, and in this manifesto there were just 7 simple requests that tackled the climate change, the digital transition, the democracy, relaunch of the European democracy, the budget, foreign policy, defense policy, and in the end, the institutional reform. So the need for an institutional reform, and it was presented, as I was saying, in the European Parliament, because we put it into the framework of the European elections. But then this network spread and developed, and now the mission that we launched in Ventotene a month ago, around, it was on the 28th of August. It is called Mission 2041. And the goal and our question and our challenge is how to preserve, because now we are talking about preservation, the European democracy from now to 2041, which is not a casual date, but it is the 100-year anniversary of the Manifesto of Ventotene. So how can we achieve the goal of democratic European Union, more democratic European Union, more united in 2041? And we decided to do that with this network. So the idea is to create the consensus among the people using the instruments and the channels that all the NGOs and actors of the civil society in Italy have, which can be sections for some type of association, which can be for the Catholic Association, it can be the church, let's say, so the community around the church. It can be digital instruments for other associations, for other NGOs, and so on. So to build the consensus, today we have to use all the possible instruments that we have, which goes from the institutions such as school and academia, as well as the media, as well as the involvement of the civil society and the NGOs. It is, of course, a big effort, but in my opinion, it's the only possible way to build the consensus in a way which is and to empower the people to imagine themselves the future they want. So using a bottom-up process and not only just a top-down, since now all the European leaders seems not to have the will, let's say, to do some step forwards, a more integrated Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. So, Daria, you have the floor.
You listen me? Can you hear me?
Yes, but if you speak louder, that would be better.
Okay, thank you. For Roberto, well, in criminal matters, Europe is increasingly entering the field. We can think of the recent European regulation on artificial intelligence and the introduction of a new crime for failure to supervise high-risk intelligent systems, for example. Anyway, in the field of environmental crime, the new directive has the advantage of reducing freedom for member states, but runs the risk of limiting the principle of legality, the rule of law principle. In fact, individual states, member states, maybe could be better at identifying the most appropriate legislation for local needs. So, anyway, the aim pursued by the European institutions expressly states with this reform is to increase environmental protection and harmonize legislation. So the hope is to not only to reducing legal differences between member states, but also to achieving certain political objective, like the capacity to fight cross-border crime and other forms of transnational organized crime, and as I say before, to combat the existence of so-called safe havens. And for Amanda, I don't know if I remember well the name, okay, Amanda. Well, the problem with ecocide is that it will be more of a manifest law is if we introduct this kind of crime, ecocide, named ecocide, is more a manifesto law due to the difficulty of understanding when ecocide occurs. The concept of ecocide is extremely vague and risks generating interpretative doubts. For these reasons, ecocide has been listed only among the recitals. Anyway, we can think that in Italy we already have a crime that can be equated to ecocide. It's called environmental disaster. So I think that we don't really need this kind of crime. The other question on the debate on major environmental crimes, the idea behind the new directive is to create common legislation which could help transnational justice. However, this is still no single court, as there is for crimes against humanity. Until such a court exists, we can't expect much more than cooperation through the, for instance, the European arrest warrant or more traditional extradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. Wonder if there are other questions for Sara and Daria from the people connected. So if there aren't, I would like to thank you both very much, and I'll give the appointment for everybody for the next session that will be at 4. And it's interesting that in this conference, like in the previous one last year, we are trying to address different priorities that were part of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And this morning we addressed the one related to young people and education, and the one related to the environment with these new tools by the Union, with this starting of building this criminal law corpus at European level. That is something which I think we'll have to continue to study in the future, as promised to be a growing aspect in EU legislation. And so thank you so much. This afternoon we'll address other priorities that of the conference related to Europe in the world and to European democracy. But in the meantime, I see that there are other questions for Sara and Daria. So I see Raffaele De Luca raise his hand. So please, Raffaele De Luca, you have the floor. We invite you to turn on the mic and the webcam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right. Yeah, I have a question for Sara. I think really she is, for what I know, she's in the best position to answer that question that I have in myself. Is about the young European people. For what I can gather, there's good news and bad news for me. And the good news is that, for what I know, young European people are much more interested in Europe and in the European Union and in what Europe does than the average middle or less younger people, let's say differently younger people in Europe. Okay, so they definitely are more interested and more prone to know more. On the other hand, paradoxically, from my experience, they are less ready to recognize the big limits than today the European Union has. Especially in the younger people that I meet regularly every day, I have the feeling that most of them already give for granted that there is already a European Union. Why? I mean, yeah, okay, you are a federalist. What do you want? I've been in Erasmus, I've been around Europe. We do have already, we have freedom of going around. The market is common, we have a common currency. I really have the feeling that among many of them, there isn't the recognition of the fundamental limits that we are encountering today, and that are the true reasons why we do not have a federation. You, Sarah, you have a similar feeling? What is from your perspective?
Thank you. So, Sarah, you have the floor.
Yes, can you hear me? Because I had some. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Raffaele, for the question. I think that somehow you already answered what I would have liked to reply. I see that there are two narratives about young Europeans. There is a narrative that says that young people are naturally, we don't know on which basis, but are naturally Europeans and feel them Europeans, which could be, I mean, a truth. At the same time, still there are some differences regarding especially the regional, the region where people comes first, and also the social status, let's say, of and it's not, I wouldn't say social, but I would say economic status of the young people. Of course, Erasmus and all the other. No, I would just say the Erasmus is a possibility that most, not most, in Italy it's not even most. I think it's about the 20% of the young people, even less, have experienced, because it's mostly for university, even though it has been open also for the young workers, but it's not that developed, especially in our country. And also the one in the university, it's not that affordable for everyone, so there are also economic limits. So this is an aspect that one narrative say that the young people are all Europeans. The other narrative is what you were saying. I mean, the content narrative actually it's also some part of the reality that we are living. For example, the largest consensus that AfD had in Germany was also by the young people. Because why? Because they use the instruments, the digital instrument, for example, in that case it was TikTok, and through that they could fire the fears that young people had, and then still the regional division. AfD had the majority in the eastern country because the eastern part is the one, I wouldn't say less developed, but the one that has been more affected, for example, also by migration and other things. So this is a fact. Same, for example, in France. In France, the largest consensus of the two extremist sides, so the far right and far left, has been supported by, they have been supported by young people. So we see also an extremization in the youth. And this let's say this vision also doubts what I was saying before, that all the young people are pro-Europeans. Then we can argue and we can ask ourselves why the reason. Of course, the fact is that somehow, and I think it's normal, the youth generation, those who were born after Maastricht, let's say, so the Gen Z and even someone before, have never lived in a situation which was different than this one. Or maybe better, the post-Eurozone generation, because I'm from 1998, but I don't remember, of course, lira in Italy. So for me, it's obvious having the euro, even though the euro it's another thing because there are countries that don't have it. But still, the fact is that, of course, everything where someone has been born into, which I can think would be democracy for the generation, the previous generation, my parents' generation, for example, democracy in Italy is something that it's given for granted and it's taken for granted. And of course, it's not. But what I see that has somehow shaped also the young generation was Brexit. And that was an important step because for the first time it was evident that it's not an irreversible process, the one of the integration, but it can be put in doubt and also criticized at the point of rejecting it. And this is of course something that really impacted especially the generation of my age. Of course, not the 2000 and so on, because then they didn't really live the Brexit as it is. So the difficulty, of course, of also explaining the limits of the EU today, it's somehow due to the fact that we were born in this situation, so it's taken for granted for us what it is. And also imagining a different perspective is difficult since the European Union itself is delivering the narrative that the European Union as it is, so the status quo is fine. I just want to address one curiosity, and then I will end this talk, that I recently, in one of this Jean Monnet project that I collaborate with and I coordinate, I brought to Brussels the high school students from 5 different countries, and we went to visit the European institution and the House of European History. And the narrative that is delivered by the officials of the institution, that is the official narrative of the European institution, is that the European integration process started with the European coal and steel community. And that was the only thing. And everything that was before never happened. So the Ventotene Manifesto never existed, the Federalist movement all around Europe never existed, and apparently Jean Monnet had this idea out of the blue of suggesting to Schuman of doing the coal and steel community. So this is also something that, of course, is difficult to criticize as young people because it's the official narrative of the European Union. So it's the official narrative given. So from the federalist side, of course, there are 2 challenges, in my opinion, nowadays. One is to preserve the European Union as it is, because it is, as it is in the sense of a democratic continent, let's say. Because of course it is challenged by liberal democracy, by nationalism, by the raising of conservatives, of sovereignists, and so on. And at the same time, we have also to do this cultural resistance somehow against the same European institutions, saying that that narrative, the idea and the choice that was made of deleting all the part that was before the Schumann's declaration was a mistake. And so I can totally understand that it's difficult that people are not aware of the limits of the European Union of today, because it is also something that the European institutions themselves, not the European Parliament, I have to say, but the other European institutions are delivering.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the exhaustive and very pointedly answer. So thank you so much to our speaker and to all the participants, both online and here in presence. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy a great lunch, and we meet at 4 for the next session of the conference. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.